So we just witnessed one of the annual most anticipated games in college football as Bama made it a joke in Death Valley. They laughed and scoffed at death, stared it right in the face, spit on it, and had Jalen Milroe stomp on it. Bama 42, LSU 13. That has to be the score of the day as it rests here in week 11, although many results keying in on college football across the nation. Of course, another one in the SEC that was fairly important as well as Georgia went down at Ole Miss 28-10. A number of teams across college football, they get counted out like your season's over, you're dead, you're gone. And then they prove to a lot of people that, especially in this 12-team playoff era, yes, there's a lot of room for two losses. There's a lot of room for losses out there. So even LSU, not necessarily dead in the SEC mathematically. They look dead on the field, and I give them no hope, little hope, the rest of the season. But our winners on this fine day of Saturday, November 9th, I would say Bama, Ole Miss at the top of the list. You've got Colorado with a huge win in Lubbock. And Clemson came away with a win. Of course, Miami went down. That gave new life to Clemson and to Pitt. Don't have a final score. I'm going to have to check on that here in just a second. From the Pitt-Virginia game, I know that the Cavaliers were up 21-13 in the fourth quarter, so Pitt may have blown that opportunity. All right, let's get to it. We'll take some calls, but first go to the scoreboard in regards to any games in progress. We will be here for at least an hour. That is up to you and how long you would like us to be around tonight. So we do appreciate your contributions. Here we go. We've got fourth quarter, 9 minutes left in Hawaii. UNLV leads Hawaii 22-20. I got to think that the Runnin' Rebels were a pretty significant favorite in that game. Air Force having an awful Florida State-like season at 1-7, lead Fresno State 26-21. They're at halftime in the Holy War, and Utah leads BYU 21-10. Of course, BYU is undefeated, 11 points down, to no surprise, as that was one of my slight upsets of the week. Washington State leads Utah State 21-7. The Cougars are looking to go to 8-1, and would that not be something if they made their way up the college football playoff rankings, which will again be released on Tuesday, and we'll be here live with all of you to witness the unveiling of the rankings and break those down. Couple things of note, of course, the Amazon links in the description section of all the videos, including this one. When you shop on Amazon, please use the link that we provide. We'll be back here on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern time. Our priority is going to be to catch up with the Ole Miss Georgia postgame. So Leanne is going to join us at the start of that show to break down Ole Miss's enormous, monumental win. Arguably the biggest in program history, although they've won national championships, so this would not be the largest, biggest win in program history. But in recent history, Ole Miss all over Georgia, of course. So 11 a.m. Eastern time on Sunday. We'll be here for the next hour or more. That's up to you. So we appreciate your contributions right here at the Voice of College Football. All right, let's get to it. We got to real MVP on the line.
Hey, Mark, how you doing this evening?
I am doing just fine. How are you?
I'm doing good. I've had a fantastic and beautiful week overall. How about you?
A fantastic and beautiful week. Yeah, considering how things have worked out this week, both personally, professionally, and otherwise, sure, I will say that the outlook is in many ways much brighter than it was, let's say, I don't know, Monday.
Concur with your sentiments and 100,000% agree with you. Let's talk about some great football teams since we've had such a great week, Mark. The Alabama Crimson Tide man, they look like a machine. You know, we had them on the border of winning a national championship or not. Could they be in that discussion? A lot of people had them completely written off. Yeah, I'm giving you credit, Mark, you and me, because I was there with you. Okay, and Alabama could win the national championship and look like garbage. This Alabama team, man, they are just somehow, some way, in the biggest moments every single year, they just find a way. And that's why they're just such a great program. Mark, how come Alabama always does this? They just always beat everybody that's elite or great or good and make it look super easy.
Well, I would say the first thing is that the guy that's going to get the most credit would be Nick Saban, and that makes a whole lot of sense. But I would say that the Alabama administration did a fine job of replacing Nick Saban with maybe what could be, in a sense, I'm not going to make any kind of comparison now for sure, nor down the road do I believe in the next 15 years there will be a Nick Saban. But I do believe that the odds are that Kalen DeBoer will be one of the elite head coaches in college football over the next 10 years at Alabama. And I think a lot of people got on his back. And I understand the loss at Vanderbilt was pretty shocking. But the guy is an excellent football coach. He's proved that at every stop. And now he's doing it at Alabama.
Yeah, Mark, another team that wears the color red, just going with that theme today, Indiana may be the biggest loser of today because, Mark, even though they won their football game, that scenario I talked to you about where an 11-1 Indiana gets left out of the playoff has greatly increased today, in my opinion, because they struggled against what will be by far, in most people's opinion, their second best win all season in Michigan, who's going to finish most likely 6-6. And then you had Georgia lose today. You can't, if you're the playoff committee, okay, you can't have Georgia above Alabama has to be above Georgia because they play head-to-head. And Alabama's going to be a bubble team. So you're going to have an argument probably between most likely Georgia and Indiana to make the college football playoff. And I'm sorry, Indiana may have the better record. They may be in a great conference, but with their strength of schedule and with the way they look today, and if they get blasted by Ohio State, which I believe is very probable now with the way they looked against Michigan, they're done, in my opinion. They would be done.
You came up with this scenario a few weeks ago with Indiana rolling undefeated and the darlings of college football and all of that. And I got to say that I would have thought it preposterous to contemplate an 11-1 Big Ten team during the offseason as being left out. But you lay it out there. I think what's happened in the SEC is bad for Indiana, and that's that there are not dominant teams that are going undefeated in the SEC. We're not having a 11-1 take on a 12-0 in the SEC championship game, as has been pretty much the standard over the last 10 or 15 years to have some kind of titanic matchup in the SEC championship game. We're going to have very flawed records in the championship game. As it stands right now, Texas and Texas A&M would meet in the SEC championship game. Of course, they play the final game of the season, so most likely one of them is going to get knocked out of that situation. But we would have a 2-loss against a 1-loss right now in the championship game, and we still have a lot of games to play. So tons of 2-loss teams in the SEC with Ole Miss, Tennessee with 1 loss, and Georgia. And so especially if Georgia beats Tennessee, then we've got 2 losses all over the place. And I would have to agree with you, better resumes than Indiana's.
Right. And the loser of the Texas A&M Texas game is also going to have a second loss. So you can end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teams with 2 losses. I think the math works out. Well,
let's say Texas A&M wins that game. Texas would have 2 losses. And Texas A&M. That's how that game has to end. Since Texas A&M currently has 2 losses.
Oh, you're talking overall. I was just talking
I'm talking overall because we are talking about the college football playoff.
Right, but there's some funky scenarios in there where you can have a 10-2 SEC team that loses in the conference championship go 10-3.
Yes.
And to me, that team shouldn't be out. but I think that team's going to get heavily negated because they have 3 losses, and everybody just sees the number 3 loss and can't conceptualize it further of what those 3 losses are and what it means.
Maybe some folks out there don't necessarily, they're not necessarily on top of the scenario we're talking about. So let's make it very as clear as possible and as likely as possible. Okay, Texas runs the table. They beat Texas A&M the final game of the season. Georgia beats Tennessee at home. Ole Miss runs the table the rest of the way because they're going to be a huge favorite the rest of the way. Alabama is as well. Actually, LSU is going to be a heavy favorite the rest of their games, but they've lost a third game outside the conference. So let's stick with the 2 lost teams. Bama's going to finish 10-2. Ole Miss is going to be 10-2. Georgia 10-2. Tennessee 10-2. Texas 11-1.
You could add Missouri in there if you want to,
and
they play
don't
South
really
Carolina.
play. Yeah, they've got the likes of South Carolina, Arkansas, and somebody else in there that's not that good. Mississippi State. Wow.
Right, and then with the Big Ten, you're not going to put Indiana. You shouldn't put Indiana above Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State, especially if Indiana gets blasted, because you'll have a direct comparison with Ohio State. Oregon beat them, Penn State played close, and Indiana got blown out. So that's 3 teams in the Big Ten that's automatically in.
Yeah, Indiana's not elevating above any of those teams unless obviously somebody stumbles. Penn State, as you just mentioned, played Ohio State close. They played a legitimate non-conference game against West Virginia. They played a tougher conference schedule. Yeah, they have it all over Indiana. Indiana did not schedule anyone non-conference. That's their fault. Not Kurt Signetti's fault, but their fault. And so they put themselves in this position based on their scheduling. And that would be just a crazy, unique situation that an 11-1 team that might lose to the eventual number 1 team in the country, if they run the table, could be left out of the playoffs.
Right. My favorite comment of the show so far, Mark by miles, from Keep Choppin', who says, "Who has Texas beaten? Who could Texas have beaten to compare directly to Indiana, Mark? I mean, who have they played to where we can have a comparison?"
Yeah, it's strange. Obviously, Texas and Indiana, there's no crossover there because they come from different worlds. So there's no possible way that they could have possibly played anybody that was the same team. Yeah, 31-12 and 20-15 come to mind.
Me too, Mark. And I feel like if I was a committee member and I was looking at that, I would favor the team that won 31-12 because there was more points. And that game also, if I recall, was on the road, whereas Indiana played at home. Yes.
So that would be the obvious comparison point. And then in addition to that, again, if Indiana beats Ohio State, then shoot, forget it. They're going to the Big Ten championship game.
Yeah, even if they play them close, forget it. Even if it's like 24-21 type game, Indiana's in. Because of their competitiveness against the number 1 team in the country, the playoff committee's not going to use it as an out. The playoff committee does things in my opinion, by the path of least resistance. Currently, what is the path of least resistance? It's Indiana. Now, if they play Ohio State close, my opinion, what's the path of least resistance? Whatever 3-loss SEC team is in the bubble, because they have 3 losses. But for everybody who's saying 11-1 Indiana isn't going to be in the playoffs, can you come up with an argument other than their record as of why they should be in the playoffs? Because just throwing out this number, 11-1, 11-1, 11-1, as that acting like you are what your record says you are, is an argument, is a fallacy. They were talking about Indiana's schedule, Mark. It's in the hundreds, I believe. It's over 100, their strength of schedule.
Wouldn't surprise me.
That's not a playoff team. I'm sorry, that's just not a playoff team.
Well, either fortunately for them or unfortunately, based on how they play for 3.5 hours in Columbus, Ohio, that's going to be the litmus test. So they're going to get an enormous amount of credit for that, or it's going to expose them as just a decent team. And they're not going to have another one. They're not going to have an Ole Miss situation where, oh, they lost to Kentucky. But no, they played all these other good teams, including Georgia, that we can point to. That doesn't exist for Indiana. So
Correct.
their whole season's on the line. And again, things could fall into place for them in a better way, in which, let's say, they lose 41-17 to Ohio State. They finish 11-1 and still make the playoff.
Oh, correct. But just based on the trajectory, if all the favorite wins out, which is looking possible, because you'd have to have a minimum, like even Miami losing today or BYU, if they lose, that doesn't change the calculation at all, because you have to have a Big 12 team. You have to have an ACC team. If anything,
what's the most likely scenario in the SEC for you?
The most likely scenario, Georgia wins out, Texas wins out, and then you just have this gluttony of teams with Alabama, LSU, Texas, A&M, Missouri, and Tennessee, all with 2 losses.
And LSU in the conference.
Yeah, but they have 3 losses in
yeah, but they could get to the SEC championship game, because we'll have to do this video this week. We'll have to try to figure it out. Although there's still too many scenarios to really break down the scenarios. But let's say it's Texas gets to the SEC championship game, and you've got Georgia, Tennessee, Ole Miss, Missouri, Bama, 5 2-loss teams. Texas A&M, 6 2-loss teams in the SEC.
And that, I would say, is the most likely scenario out of every scenario, because I can't see a game in which they don't play each other.
If I didn't know the schedule as well as I do, because I do this stuff every day, if you just said, okay, these teams have these records and we still have 3 weeks to play, and they're all going to finish chalk and win out, I would say, well, of course they're not going to, because they're going to play a bunch of times, but they don't. You're right. All these schedules are full of a bunch of Oklahoma and Auburn games, and otherwise Mississippi State.
Right, which means, Mark, it's possible. I mean, I don't know how the committee's going to be able to separate these teams. And if they're in the best conference, which I think they've proven this year, I think it's more likely the committee just throws them all in there and maybe puts them all on the road and says, hey, you're not going to be the 5, 6, 7, 8 seed, but you'll be the 9, 10, 11 seed, and you'll have to go on the road and prove it. I think that's what's likely to happen. So we're going to see some weird things this year in the playoff. And you want to address this comment? You looked like you were chomping at the bit.
Well, Keep Chomping says Texas's best win is going to be over a team that did not make a bowl game. Okay, well, as it currently stands, they've got to win against Vandy. I don't know that they're going to make a bowl game. They're sitting at 5-5, correct?
No, they're at 6-4.
6-4. So they got to win over a bowl team that is a better resume than Michigan for sure. So they do have a win over bowl team. They've got to win over, who won this Missouri-Oklahoma game? Missouri won, right?
Yeah, Oklahoma, man. They just had the wheels fall off their wagon, Mark. It was embarrassing. They fumbled the ball while they were trying to go down on a game-winning drive. They fumbled the ball. Missouri picked it up and ran it into the end zone. That's the type of season Oklahoma's having.
Okay. Well, I took Missouri to win it outright, so I'm happy for that. So, yeah, Texas does have a better schedule than, although it is a weak SEC schedule, Texas A&M's on the schedule as well coming up. And, you know, if Texas loses to Texas A&M, then, you know, we can run through those 2 schedules. But again, to compare the one common opponent favors Texas considerably.
Correct. The final thing I'll ask you about, Mark, is if a bunch of irrelevant ranked teams lose, does anybody care?
What teams are we talking about?
Talk is Pitt is a good example of it. Defending Pitt, I'm sure he's just coping and seething. His team lost in irrelevant Virginia. Kansas beat Iowa State. There's a few examples for you right there.
Well, it depends. We're college football fans. I would expect the Kansas fans to celebrate a win against a team that was 7-1 or 7-1.
Right, but
Is
I'm
that what you're
talking now in
asking
the
me?
grand scheme. The grand scheme of things, Mark.
Oh, in the grand scheme of things, no. In the grand scheme of things, since Pitt lost to Virginia,
Correct.
so yeah, they can have a nice little 9-3 season in which they didn't play anyone significant.
Yeah, it's a cute story, but the 2 or 3 Pitt fans that were in the chat making fun of me or roasting me because me attacking Pitt and saying nobody cares about them and how it just feigns on their soul as if there's this legion of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of Pitt fans that just rival Michigan, Ohio State. No, just no.
Well, I don't want to disparage any college football fans for the teams that they root for, because I actually like talking to those people that root for Wake Forest and Pitt and whomever else, because it pulls me away from the constant Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State talk.
I know. I just think people should just know their roles. Everybody has it. Seriously, I've accepted. We're 8-4. We're always going to be 8-4. Hopefully, Corey's accepted. Corey Brad has accepted. They're going to be 8-4 forever because they can't even beat UCLA. It's fine. You just got to accept your role in life. Some of these teams can occasionally win the national championship and fall down to irrelevancy. Michigan, Auburn, for example. You got some teams that are elite and just always win. Alabama, Ohio State. You just got to accept your role. That's fine. Just don't attack me and call me out for saying your team's going to do all this and then completely nosediving against an irrelevant team. Yes. That's like 5-4.
Pitt's a team that has a good record, but they're not a good team. They have a nice looking record, but they're not a good football team.
Absolutely. And that's better than being the opposite, like Florida State or Purdue, just being a horrible football team and having a horrible record. Shout out to Florida State, by the way. Another week not covering, Mark. Just beautiful, beautiful sights. I'm still not tired of them losing, Mark. I'm still not tired of it. I still want them to lose by more.
Well, you got sick of the whole offseason kicking and screaming their way out of the ACC. And now I'm sure the Big Ten and the SEC really want them.
Exactly. I'm still not tired of them losing. I hope they keep losing. They play Charleston Southern next week, or the week after. I'm hoping they lose that game. But Mark, it's good talking to you. Indiana, sorry, but you're out. Even though they're undefeated, they're out.
Well, Indiana's not out, but the real MVP's got it added up in such a way that they're out. I do understand his approach to the scenario because it makes total sense, but I would have to sit down with the entire deal, as I will this week. We're going to post some videos this week where we're going to go through the various conferences and lay out all the scenarios. And I also have another idea for a show that I would like to do on a regular basis, right coming out of these college football weekends, that I would think would be a lot of fun for the nerds out there like myself. And I would just like to sit here either during a live stream or I'll do a recorded piece where I'll just block off all the box scores. We will just go through all the box scores. Let's say in the Big 12, we'll do a Big 12 box score hour and just go through all the Big 12 box scores. We'll do the Big 10. We'll do the SEC. We'll go through all the conferences. But people can get mad at the real MVP about the scenario with the SEC versus Indiana. But now that doesn't mean that the College Football Playoff Committee is going to see it the same way. But it does mean that Indiana's got a weak schedule. And if they go to Ohio State and get their doors blown off, I would have never thought that an 11-1 team would get left out. But this quagmire that's the SEC is setting up for such a scenario, possibly. Adam, how's it going tonight?
Hey, Mark, how are you doing?
Good. How you doing tonight?
Yeah, doing good. Pretty interesting day of college football. I've just got 3 quick points I want to make. So, first, Ole Miss beats Georgia Georgia beats Texas. Of course, loses to Ole Miss. LSU beats Ole Miss. Alabama beats Georgia. I could go on and on, but the chaos, the incongruous results make it impossible to rank these teams. So ultimately, the rankings of the top 12 teams are really going to be arbitrary. So what standard or criteria would you use given the chaos and the contradictions in the results, like a Georgia beating a Texas but losing to an Ole Miss? I'm sorry, but like beating an Ole Miss that, how do you reconcile that?
Well, you're kind of going through the process I go through every late night, Saturday night, early Sunday in trying to devise my top 25 that actually makes sense. I've got a big grid. People think I just spit into a fan or something, but that's what the AP writers and others do. But I don't do that. I build a grid in which I've got wins and losses, and then I make comparisons. Now, if the college football playoff situation was on the line and it was up to me to determine. I think you've got to start out by just listing the wins and losses for all the teams that you're trying to compare and list them in order. So you start with the best win, the second best win, the third best win, and you list them all the way down. And you don't just stop at 3 and say, so some of the conversations we have on here, we're just focused on somebody's best win or their one loss or their worst loss. But the entire resume has got to be taken into consideration with weight given more to the best games that are played. But I would list everybody's wins and losses in order of severity, first and foremost, and then you make that comparison, and then you add the point differential element to it. Who was dominant or lacked dominance in those performances? That's where I would start.
So when considering the variables that you might use to determine who maybe the 12 best teams are, would injuries factor into? Would injuries be a variable, and would road losses be a variable? So if, for example, a depleted Georgia team lost to, I don't know, just randomly Mississippi State, but if they had the people that typically were the starters, we think we would have defeated them. So would you weigh that loss less? Would injuries be a variable?
The current committee uses injuries. They use it as a criteria. It's actually a stated criteria. I haven't given that too much thought because I will never have that type of power, but I would tend to throw out the injuries myself. Like, I think they're valid, like if you're going to predict a game or you're going to try to choose the best teams. But I think that these teams, I hate to discredit what they've earned just because they've had the unfortunate situation of piling up injuries.
No, that's a good point. It's just that, I've been trying to figure out a formula, like to have some empirical analysis of who the best teams are, and I'm finding it to be extraordinarily difficult and very challenging. So I look forward to seeing how the season plays out. The second point I wanted to make was, I'm sure I'm going to start getting some hate, especially for the third point. But the second point is, look, I think Indiana got exposed tonight, and I think Cignetti got exposed. Everyone's talking about how Cignetti is going to be the next Elvis Presley, the best coach, the next Bear Bryant. Give me a break. Indiana was outplayed by a Michigan team that has no quarterback and no coach either, because that coach on 3rd and goal decided to run Alex Orge. Anyway, I don't want to get it, but Indiana did not look very impressive tonight. So when determining the best teams, do you ever think of bad wins?
Sure.
I just don't know how to quantify that.
If we were evaluating these teams in a silo and we were just saying, how good is Indiana's season? I would not hold this against them. I would say they're 10-0 and they've won the games and they've done what's required of them each week to win these games. However, we have a finite number of slots to fill. Therefore, we have to look at the performance. Again, I'm going to go to my top 25. I look at the results. I look at who you played, number 2. And number 3, I look at your performance. So, yes, Indiana barely beating Michigan should be held against them because we're comparing the quality of play on the field because we're trying to project how these teams will compete against each other in a playoff.
I agree. Sometimes I think that a bad win is worse than a close loss, but I don't.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just don't know how to quantify it, so it's very difficult to include it. The last thing I'll say, and I know everyone's going to think I'm crazy, but hear me out for just 1 minute. Oregon is finished, and I predict Oregon is done, and they should forget about any hopes of a national championship. 30 seconds left in the first half in Outson Stadium. They're up 14-10 on a 4-5 Maryland team. 37-34 over Boise State. 31-10 over a Michigan State team that is not good at all. Oregon, of course, will be in the playoff. Oregon has no chance of winning the national championship. And that's why I have a problem with the 12-team playoff. We're including these teams that are not going to have a chance. And I think Oregon has shown itself, even with their favorable schedule, to be quite mediocre. And I think we'll see that in the Big Ten championship. But I could be wrong. So thanks for taking my call. Always good to talk to you. Great book again.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate you being here.
All right. Take care.
You can catch Adam on the Rutgers channel. So Adam delivers the weekly Rutgers show for us, and that is Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Don't hold that against me, Adam, if I got that wrong, but I believe it's Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern time because we now have so many shows, I can't keep track of all of them in my head. I've got a document that does that for me, but I believe the Rutgers show, where you can talk with Adam, is over on the Rutgers channel, 7 p.m. Eastern time every Monday. And then, of course, Adam knocks out the post game for us, and Rutgers with a nice little win against the Minnesota team that was on a roll going into today's game. And I actually, with some of the outcome, the way it was playing out for the noon games with Texas, Florida being a bore, Ohio State, Purdue being a bore, I found myself navigating to the Minnesota Rutgers game with about 10 minutes left. And Rutgers defense put it on Max Brosmer and company. And that was a big win for Rutgers. That was by far, well, not by far. They beat Virginia Tech earlier this season, beat Washington. So it was arguably their best win and certainly their best performance in a long time since the beginning of the season. All right. Comments and questions, anything in the chat? Do not see anything. Let's go to the scoreboard. And again, I may be completely out of my mind, but I think a box score live stream, or maybe it'll be a video, would be fun. It would be fun for me. I don't know if it would be entertaining. Maybe nobody would watch it. But let's see. That would have to be sometime early Sunday, because I would want to do it after all the games are complete. But I wouldn't want it to last too long after that, because everybody gets focused on the next week very quickly. But to go through all the box scores and maybe do a Big Ten video, SEC, on down the line, each and every conference. Maybe I'll do that and see how many people watch. All right. Air Force looking to go to 2-7, lead Fresno State 33-21. They've got the ball, and they're in Fresno State territory with only 2.5 minutes left. So this should be a win for Troy Calhoun and Air Force. We'll have to dial up Coach Calhoun. He's been on here at the Voice of College Football about 5 times, but it's been a long time. BYU trailing at Utah 21-13. And again, with 8 minutes left in the third, it's not necessarily panic time, as BYU has converted a field goal to get within 8, but still very interesting there. Utah 4-4. Their star tight end, Brant Keithy, said this week that this would be Utah's Super Bowl. And so That should have given us indication that Utah was going to fire on all cylinders. Utah State trails at Washington State 28-7. Okay, earlier, UNLV holds off Hawaii 29-27. The Running Rebels are now 7-2 under Barry Odom. Oregon 39-18 over Maryland as Adam ran down. Unfortunately, I took Maryland to cover 23 points, and they only won by 21. Ohio State bludgeoned Purdue 45-0. Huge game in the SEC as Ole Miss beat Georgia 28-10. Consider the flip position of these two teams in one season. At this time last year, Ole Miss with the same quarterback, the same weapons on offense, basically, minus now Quinshon Judkins, but an array of skill position players, excellent speed, excellent skill, went to Georgia and got completely slapped across the face, 52-17. They could not hang with Georgia physically. They got manhandled, dominated. Lane Kiffin through the transfer portal, and by 2 seasons ago, signing a recruiting class in which his top 8 players, or 7 of 8, are on defense, address the defense, Walter Nolan and others up front, and Ole Miss was the far more physical team tonight against Georgia. It's somewhat shocking to see that Georgia looks like a pretty ordinary football team. Pretty ordinary football team that 95% of the teams in the nation would love to be, but still, for them, ordinary. I enjoyed watching this one. Miami and Georgia Tech. Yellow Jackets win at 28-23. They took a very interesting approach to the quarterback position where they had, I can't think of the freshman's name. They have a passing quarterback, then they've got Haynes King. Oh, shoot. I said the guy's name about 18 times during a video. Aaron Shiloh for Georgia Tech. They just alternated these guys, just almost play by play, which I do not recommend, but it worked. And Miami went into a funk offensively where when Miami is cooking, when they are sizzling, they look unstoppable on offense because Cam Ward is a magician. He looks remarkable. But with all that remarkable play comes all the stupid plays that he makes by doing pirouettes and pinball against defensive linemen in the pocket and throws the ball up for grabs. Now, he didn't throw any picks today, but he did make some what I predicted in our Miami show this week. I said, when they make the college football playoff, and now that's called into question, make the college football playoff when he's facing better athletes, elite defenses, he better tighten up his game. And so Miami goes down to Georgia Tech 28-23. They gave up 280 yards rushing. Florida got drilled at Texas 49-17. Had I been aware of the Florida secondary situation, they had their top 3 cornerbacks out and their 4th cornerback was playing hurt. And of course, they didn't have either one of their 2 top quarterbacks. Graham Mertz is gone for the season. And of course, TJ Lagway also hurt. So their 3rd string walk-on guy was playing, Warner. They were just wiped out by Texas. Washington, Penn State, did not see any of that, but I expected Penn State to roll 35-6. You got to give this up for James Franklin. They lose these big games against Ohio State all the time, and at one point, Michigan. But they bounce back. They do. And they complete these seasons. How many times have they lost to Ohio State and Michigan to drop to like 6-2, and then they pick it up and they win the last 4? Tennessee beat Mississippi State 33-14. That lines up the Vols and the Dogs for a huge game, Georgia-Tennessee in Athens. We've talked ad nauseum on Indiana and Michigan. I posted a video on that game, as well as Alabama-LSU, Ohio State-Purdue, Miami, Georgia Tech as well. Notre Dame crushes Florida State. Florida State is the biggest train wreck on the scene. 52-3. Maybe it's about time for me to produce a Florida State video and really look into what in the hell is going on there. Bama, maybe the most impressive team of the day over LSU 42-13. Although, no, I got to go Ole Miss, even though they played at home. I've got still more respect for Georgia's coaching staff, head coach, and team over LSU. So team of the day, Ole Miss, number 2, Bama. Colorado in the running, Georgia Tech in the running. Boise State 28-21 over Nevada. Ashton Jeanty had 209 yards rushing in 3 days. Just another day at the office for Ashton Jeanty. 209 and 3 touchdowns. Kansas 45-36 over Iowa State. So the Cyclones have now lost 2 consecutive games, and they will need to do some work to get to the Big 12 championship game. Pitt had an opportunity with Miami losing earlier in the day to tie in the loss column for for second place behind SMU to get to the conference championship game, and they could not beat Virginia at home. Sometimes we look at who the best teams in the country with bad records are. Reverse that. If we look at the worst teams in the country that have good records, Pitt's at the top of the list. This is not a good football team. They were losing last week to SMU 48-11 in the third quarter. 48-11 to SMU. And they lost to Virginia at home. They beat Cal by 2 points at home on a missed field goal, and so forth and so on. Are they a bad football team? No, they're not a bad team, but they're not a good team. Colorado beat Texas Tech 41-27. Shadur Sanders 30-43 for 291 and 3 touchdowns. Taj Brooks 137 yards and 1 touchdown. I'm guessing that few people know that Taj Brooks, the only back in the nation. Well, maybe not. I would think Caleb Johnson would be in that category and Ashton Jeanty as well, but he has gained at least 100 yards in every game this season. We've got Clemson came back to beat Virginia Tech after not scoring in the first half. Clemson wins 24-14. Big win for Clemson because Miami lost. Clemson now has tied Miami for second place, but for a spot in the ACC championship game. And this will cause me to do a breakdown on the ACC tiebreakers and where that currently stands with Clemson and Miami. And I wanted to do it with Clemson, Miami, and Pitt. A lot of points scored in the fourth quarter in Columbia because this was a rock fight for much of the game, but Missouri beat Oklahoma 30-23. Army is still undefeated. They beat North Texas 14-3. So give it up for Army. They are 9-0 for the first time since 1996. That team went to the Independence Bowl and played Damian Craig and Auburn to a 31-29 game. There's the aforementioned Rutgers win. They get to 5-4. They defeat Minnesota 26-19. Syracuse and Boston College. Boston College wins 37-31 with a backup quarterback playing. Kyle McCord passed for 392 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Boston College ran for over 300 yards in that game. West Virginia over Cincinnati 31-24. West Virginia was a 4 or 5 point underdog. I picked them to win outright. You've got Texas State over ULM, 38-17. Navy 28, South Florida 7. The Midshipmen are now 7-2. Liberty 37, Middle Tennessee 17. UConn's a 7-3 football team. They defeated UAB 31-23. Marshall 37, Southern Miss 3. Duke over NC State. I missed that one, 29-19. San Jose State went to Oregon State and won 24-13. Georgia State lost at James Madison 38-7. Kennesaw State, of course, their first year in FBS play, they fall to 1-8, but they put up a fight at UTEP 43-35 in overtime. Tulane over hapless Temple. Temple always sucks. They do again this year, 52-6, and Tulane waiting for Boise and Army to collapse. Well, they would get to face Army in the conference championship game to try to squeeze in the back door of that entryway into the college football playoff with a group of 5. South Carolina over Vandy 28-7. South Carolina's a pretty good football team. Lenora Sellers, 238 yards passing, 2 touchdowns. Rocket Sanders, 126 on the ground, 52 through the air, and 3 touchdowns. Rich Rod's Jacksonville State team won in overtime over Louisiana Tech, 44-37. Louisiana defeated Arkansas State 55-19. Western Kentucky 41, New Mexico State 28. I usually, after this show and into Sunday, go back and I try to read as many box scores and as many recaps as possible, and then also skim through as many games as possible. And one of the games that I'm going to go back to, this may be actually the first game I go to, is Arizona State and UCF. I thought this was going to be a great game. It looks like it was. Arizona State is now 7-2, coming off 3-9 last year. 7-2. They defeat UCF 35-31. TCU over Oklahoma State. The Cowboys, Mike Gundy's team, and Mike Gundy has been given all sorts of credit as being one of the top coaches in the nation, but he really needs to take it on the chin this year. They brought back one of the best running backs in the country, a veteran quarterback, their entire receiver core. It was supposed to be a top 5 offensive line, and they are 0-7 in the Big 12. That's tough to do. And then earlier this week, Bowling Green beat Central Michigan 23-13. Another max score here with Miami defeating Ball State 27-21. Ohio and Kent State 41-0. Northern Illinois defeated Western Michigan 42-28. I have no idea who's leading the MAC at this point. App State and Coastal Carolina. There you see the other scores from earlier this week. We, of course, got off the air prior to UCLA and Iowa last night, so let me comment on that. I was super impressed with UCLA. They're actually a viable football team. They have probably improved more than just about anyone in the country. Now, did Iowa play well? No, but Iowa's got a running back in Caleb Johnson that is running over everyone not named Ohio State, and UCLA played great rush defense in that game. They were phenomenal. And they had scored 17 points in the first half, and they fumbled at the goal line, and they threw an interception in the end zone. They should have had 31 points against Iowa's defense at halftime. UCLA is a legitimately decent, I'm not going to go overboard. They've beaten Rutgers, Nebraska, and Iowa, but they're a decent team. All right, folks, appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football, and always look forward to this show. Yes, Lemansky, I understand what happened, but UCLA was taking it to Iowa way before Brendan Sullivan got hurt. Do you know how many injuries UCLA has? They basically can't field the running back position. No, UCLA took it to Iowa. They were by far the superior team physically. Yes, I know Brendan Sullivan got hurt. Brendan Sullivan was playing like crap before he got hurt. Yes, I know that. I watched the game. Not that I think that doesn't mean that UCLA is better than Iowa. I don't. Now, they were better than Iowa last night. I don't think they're better than Iowa. But I got to say, I thought that Iowa a couple weeks ago was the fifth best team in the Big Ten. Now, I think they've been dragged down with the other 10 teams, Minnesota, UCLA, Illinois, those other teams. I still think that Iowa's near the top of that mid group in the Big Ten. But we had this conversation a couple of weeks ago on the Iowa show. They are much closer, Iowa is, to the mid tier of the Big Ten than they are in reaching the elite of the Big Ten. They're the best of the middle. But yeah, UCLA is so much improved. They were a joke earlier in the season. They were getting steamrolled, and somebody made a post which didn't necessarily take a rocket scientist to come up with, because I basically ran this down off the top of my head the other day. But UCLA, the games that they've lost this year, they lost to Oregon, who's 10-0. They lost to Penn State, who's 8-1. They lost to Minnesota, who was 6-3, now 6-4 after a loss. They lost to LSU. They lost to anyway, all the teams that they've lost to are really good. Oregon, Penn State, LSU, Minnesota, Indiana. You love college football, or you would not be here at 1 o'clock in the morning. And therefore, I recommend this one. Somebody very near and dear authored this one. Disputed National Champions. You can look it up on Amazon. The link's in the description section of the video. Lemansky, thank you for that. Hit the like button, please. That's not to stroke my ego. That's because the YouTube algorithm demands it. They actually, if they see that, let's say 2,000 people watch this video and 20 people like it, they determine that, 2,000 people just happened to stumble upon this video, but they didn't like it, versus if 2,000 people watch this video and 1,000 people like it, and then they continue to push it out in the algorithm. And it also strokes my ego. No, I'm just kidding. I have no idea how many people like these videos. Todd, yes, SMU leads the ACC. Let that sink in. We are 10 games deep into the season, generally for most teams. Some have played 9, some have played 10. SMU is 8-1 overall. They are 5-0 in the ACC. And Florida State is 1-9. Every year leading into the season, I do what's called my plus or minus 3, which is a listing of those teams that have either improved by at least 3 games or declined by at least 3 games from the previous season. And it's always a longer list than people anticipate it to be. It's usually about a third of the sport. Well, let's look at the standings. just think about what has happened in this sport. Let's look at the major conferences in one season. Bear with me here just a second. Okay. If you look at the ACC, Miami went 7-5 in the regular season last year. They're 9-1. So they should be one team that's going to elevate at least 3 games this year. If they finish 10-2, then they will be at least 3 games better. Pitt was 3-9 last year. They're 7-2 this year. Syracuse, they were either 4-8. No. They were 6-6. So they're 6-3. They've got a chance, but most likely they won't. Virginia is now 5-4. They were 3-9 last year. They have a chance. On the downside, North Carolina State was 9-3 last year. They're 5-5. And Florida State, of course, they are the kings of depression. 12-0 in the regular season last year, 1-9 this year. That's an all-timer. BYU was 5-7 last year. They're 8-0 right this second. Colorado, of course, elevated from 1-11 to 4-8. And hey, whether you like him or not, we do have to give a lot of credit to Deion Sanders. It is what it is. He's accomplishing in the Big 12. He's in line to go to the conference championship game. Deion Sanders from 1-11 the previous season to his first season of 4-8 to now 7-2. Iowa State, despite their 2-game losing streak, they were 7-5 last year. They're now 7-2. And Arizona State, look at 3-9 to 7-2. Cincinnati was 3-9 last year. Yes, I'm almost certain they might have been 4-8. They're 5-4. Baylor was 3-9 last year, 5-4. Houston, 4-8, 4-5. They've got a chance to do something there. On the flip side, Kansas, 8-4 last year, 3-6 this year. Utah, 8-4 last year, 4-4 this year. Arizona, of course, with Jed Fish last year, 9-3 in the regular season, 3-6 this year. And Oklahoma State, 9-3 in the regular season last year, 3-7. Big Ten, of course, Indiana, 3-9 to 10-0. Anybody else? Illinois got a shot because they went 5-7 last year. They're 6-3. They could go 9-3. They could. It's doubtful. Washington, 12-0, 5-5. Michigan, 12-0, 5-5. So it's funny to think about because most of these we didn't anticipate. Now, Washington, yes. Michigan, not to this extent. But Washington, yeah, they were a clear candidate to drop from 12-0 to something. Probably going to be 6-6. Northwestern last year, 7-5, now 4-5. USC last year, 7-5, now 4-5. Maryland, 7-5 in the regular season, now 4-5. Think about this. Purdue so bad that they were 4-8 last year, and they could still drop by another 3 games to go to 1-11. In the SEC, well, we got Texas A&M. They went, they were 7-5 last year. They're 7-2, so they could elevate. And South Carolina was 5-7 last year, 6-3 this year. We're really too far out to project these too accurately, but Vandy is obvious, 2-10, now 6-4. Oklahoma, 10-2 last year, 5-5. Kentucky, 7-5 last year, 3-6 this year. Interesting. All right, folks, appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. We have done our time. Thank you for calling. Thank you for commenting. We'll be back at 11 a.m. Eastern time on Sunday morning. Meanwhile, the top 25 that actually makes sense will be out sometime on Sunday as well. And yeah, I think we may revamp our content delivery here with a few thoughts I have, a few ideas. All right, we do appreciate you. Thanks for being here. Please hit the like button on the way out. If you're not subscribed, it costs nothing. See you next time. Oh, Lemansky. Can't miss this. Thank you for that. Lemansky, quote, I watched the game, end quote. I know you do, Mark. Thanks, Lemansky. Appreciate you. You sponsored our hour. See you all next time.